Okay. Jim, would you like to come up and introduce the Mr. Wright and just kind of give us an overview of the process?
Yes, I'm sure everyone in the room has seen the latest and the changing of our relationships and trying to renegotiate and make amendments to our contract. Mr. Wright and I have met with OUC senior staff on several occasions and trying to explain to them what our dilemma is and how can they help us and try to get to market pricing as opposed to the way we're doing it right now. OUC has been very accommodating in that. They understand the issues and they still value us as a customer. We're still buying megawatts from them, so that adds a value in that respect. Another question that was posed, that was asked of me at the last council meeting, was what happens if we lose the load from the unincorporated areas as well as Indian River Shores, i.e. we lose the lawsuit. And in that, I did a preliminary report that shows that what would happen in essence is that the city of Vero Beach would become really in all requirements and totally dependent on FMPA. Right now, their rates are higher than OUC and are projected to be higher than OUC. So immediately there's a rate increase to our native load. We would also have the impact of going back to OUC because we would be bringing down the capacity and trying to get a peaking demand. So that's where we came up with some of our cost changes that would impact the citizens of the Vero Beach, and it would be somewhere in the neighborhood, in my opinion, about 30%. The other side of that equation is if you just went and you only had your native load, i.e. what's in the corporate limits, then obviously 6% of a smaller number equates to a much smaller number. So in that component, if we retain our services at the existing levels, then that would have an impact on other revenue streams, primarily the property tax. So if we said that we had to make up the differential in the contributions from the electric system by property taxes, as we all have discussed in the past, $1 million equals 25% rate increase in property taxes. That's how it equates out. And so if you take $2 million quickly off of that contribution, then you're talking about a 50% increase in property taxes. That's how those numbers were put together. Chef is here to explain to you some of the intricacies and try to go through his memo that explains what we have been able to accomplish and at least the upper management, and I think they've gotten at least a preliminary sign-off from their board on the concessions that they would make with the city of Vero Beach and help us through some of our issues and challenges. And it gives them a little flexibility, and it also obviously helps us in our pricing mechanism, what we're doing. Just to give you an overview, this discussion of how we arrived at these projections that Chef will talk about was really a major team effort. Tom obviously was involved in it. Cindy was in it. And there are things that we obviously are still debating up to the end because some of it is based on projections of how we're going to get from point A to point B. But for example, the decommissioning versus taking down of the power plant, the terminology is the issue there that we are still looking at that. But at the same time, we do understand what our budgeting number is, that $4.1 million that we pay to keep the plant online, and then we also understand that there are exposures in the future. Similar to what we're trying to do in our defined benefit plan versus the defined contribution plan in the pensions applies here as well. And by doing a contract that we could get capacity and some peaking from another utility, takes us out of that risk factor is associated with running a power plant. You can go to Duke Energy today and you can find out what some of the risk exposures are in running power plants. Obviously, we're not a nuclear plant, but it's sort of dramatic what happens. So hopefully we would not only offset our expenses that we project in the power plant, but we would also be able to reduce the risk issues that would be faced with the city going into the future. with that, hopefully, Chef, I didn't say too much, but Chef Wright can sort of go over his memo with you guys and give you the presentation, or at least an outline of the presentation that will be given to the City Council tonight. Chef.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to be here. Thanks again. I'm going to try to keep this fairly high level, but I'm happy to go as far into the weeds as any of you all want to ask questions. So, and it plays into my personality to go into the weeds, so I'm going to try to stay out of them from the beginning. As Jim said, he and I have met several times with senior management of OUC, and we agreed to a set of potential terms that each of us would recommend to our respective governing boards, the OUC commissioners, who are the governing board of the Orlando Utilities Commission, and the Vero City Council. We think there's significant value to both sides in the potential deal. From our side, what we would get is a major reduction in the capacity payments, really for the remaining life of our PPA with OUC. The big discounts would be in the early years and would be about $7 million a year. And you can look, there's a table in the memo, it's 6.949 to 6.991 million, but call it $7 million per year of reductions in our capacity payments. That's just straight cash discount. They would sell us peaking capacity at market rates and, in my opinion, reasonable rates for the remainder of the term. That would enable us to shut down the Vero Beach power plant. Retire it is the word we are using. So they would get some revenue restoration by selling us the peaking capacity. On our side, correspondingly, we would be able to retire Big Blue and save what is, for fiscal 15, $4 million a year if and when you could implement all these things. We can't implement the revised PPA pricing until the PPA is definitively drafted and approved by both governing bodies. We can't begin taking the service under the new PPA until the transmission arrangements for receiving the peaking capacity are in place. Yeah, Tom can correct me. I think we're cautiously optimistic that the transmission arrangements may be relatively more simple, but there are no guarantees until FPL does a transmission study to confirm that. If they're more complicated, if there are significant upgrades involved, it could be some number of months before we can get there. And it's a package deal, so we can't take the peaking capacity until the transmission's available to accommodate that. We don't get the pricing discounts until the peaking capacity sale kicks in. We have fundamentally agreed, again, at the staff level with OUC that realistically, folks, this isn't going to happen on January 1st. We're going to try to make it happen ASAP. But we've agreed fundamentally that we will get 3 full years of the discounts. If it kicks in March or April or May, we'll get 3 full years of discounts. That is, the discount levels won't drop down at the end of at the end of calendar 17. They'll move out month for month is the basic agreement that we have. OUC gets some benefits. They'll get a minimum take under the base capacity contract of 85 megawatts. That compares to our current level of 93, our next year level of 95, and what is projected to increase from there. It's a protection to them that's not in the present contract. They would get the option to acquire the output of our St. Lucie entitlement share through a power purchase agreement, not taking our place in the contract, not a contract assignment, but a straight power purchase agreement. So if we pay FMPA $7 million a year for power from St. Lucie 2, if they exercise their option, we'd pay FMPA $7 million, they'd pay us $7 million. It would be a complete wash for us. But they believe there's some value to them there. They would get to keep the gas capacity, which is already assigned to them under the existing PPA. I think there's one other thing. They would have a one-time option, which I can explain a bit, to terminate the base PPA no earlier than 2020 and with not less than 2 years' notice. The reason that the date is 2020 is that sometime in the 2020-2021 timeframe, OUC is looking to add capacity to serve all of its load, including its native retail load as well as its wholesale customers' load. They want to preserve the option to terminate this agreement if they decide they want to get out of the wholesale power business. They have also tentatively agreed that the definitive agreement would include provisions where we would negotiate in good faith to replace whatever capacity we were taking from them at then market-based rates. Neither party would be obligated to enter into that agreement. They could say no, we could say no. But that's the guts of it. I think I pretty much covered the timing issue. Again, the logic goes like this. We don't get the discounted pricing under the base PPA, which is the big value to us, the $7 million a year, until we can also start purchasing the peaking capacity. We can't start purchasing the peaking capacity until the transmission arrangements are in place. Those are big ifs. Additionally, we earlier in July got an agreement amongst OUC, FPL, and the city that we could have these conversations toward rate reduction measures and that no one would assert a breach of contract or interference with contract or anything like that. But we have asked FPL via an email yesterday that I sent shortly after we distributed the memorandum to Council. We've asked FPL if they would please confirm to us that if we enter into these arrangements with OUC, they will not consider it to be any kind of legal problem, a breach of contract by us, i.e. a breach of our asset purchase and sale agreement with FPL or any kind of tortious interference claim against OUC. So we'll be awaiting that. And again, we're waiting on the transmission service arrangements. And Tom is in regular contact with FPL transmission personnel, and the game plan is to get this all done as quickly as we can. OUC's, just so you'll know, OUC's board meets on December 2nd. Can we get the definitive agreement written and in front of their board by December 2nd? I'll knock wood on that. That'll be a challenge. This is going to be a medium complex drafting exercise, but maybe not. But the bottom line is we're going to do it as quickly as we can. Why don't I stop there and answer any questions, and then we can talk about if everything falls into place, and then we can talk about what the rate reduction impacts could be, knocking wood, and again, assuming everything falls into place and everything else holds still and Murphy doesn't show up and things like that. But let's have questions now if you have any.
Murphy seems to be our uncle in the utility business here, so.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I do appreciate that summary, and I do have. I guess I have several questions just about this, and probably this is the place where we will start to get weedy. But this commission is the place to get weedy on these sort of issues, because we don't have any other issues. It's just utilities here. Now. So we're getting a reduction in the capacity charges, in the cost of it, or the amount of the capacity? Which are we reducing?
The capacity charge rate.
The rate. So
yes,
we're
sir.
still maintaining the capacity that we're purchasing from the OUC.
Correct.
But we're paying less for it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And are we actually? We're probably increasing it by $54 million, or 54 million megawatts.
We're increasing by 54 megawatts as replacing the Big Blue capacity under a separate price schedule for peaking capacity.
Okay. All right. And what is do we have an estimate of the net savings of that peaking capacity versus the $4 million of the plant?
For right now, we are looking at it as though it will be an approximate wash. And I'll tell you why. We do expect that if we were to continue to operate the Vero Beach Power Plant, there would be significant additional capital costs that would continue to be incurred on the order of $2-3 million a year going forward. However, there are no numbers to that effect either in this year's budget or in this year's 5-year capital improvement plan. My understanding as to why that is that the budget was developed essentially with the idea we were going to be shutting it down one way or the other, and so nothing is in there. The way I see it, additionally, there are going to be some, when we are able to start this process, we can't shut it down until we have the new agreement in place and are starting to receive the peaking capacity. It's not the kind of deal where you can just turn out the lights, take the keys, and tell everybody to go home. There are going to be some wind-down costs. For practical purposes, we're assuming that there are going to be several $100,000 of cost in the first year after we start the shutdown effort. If you add a few $100,000 to the $3.5 million of peaking charges, that's about $4 million. The budget number for power plant O&M for fiscal 15 is $4,094,000. We think that's approximately a wash. In the longer term, probably the peaking charges under the peaking capacity deal with OUC, which will be embedded in the new PPA, will probably be less than what it really would have cost at $4 million a year for O&M plus $2 or $3 million a year for capital maintenance costs at Big Blue. But what that really translates into is our costs being lower than they would have otherwise been, but we can't stand here today and tell you that's going to result in outright lower rates versus today. So for planning and presentation purposes, we're treating it as a wash.
Okay. Now, is there a renegotiation of the? We're renegotiating the capacity charge.
Yes, sir.
And are we renegotiating the actual power charge?
If by that you mean the energy charges,
Yes.
Basically the fuel and variable O&M costs, no, we're not. Those will remain the same.
Okay. All right.
It's still, in more technical terms, it's still an OUC system product. So we're getting the OUC system energy price, and we're just getting a reduced capacity payment.
Okay. So we're not getting a discounted or the same price that Lake Worth was getting.
Correct. And actually, OUC's Lake Worth's energy charges are the same as our energy charges. Lake Worth, to be very direct, Lake Worth was in the right place at the right time, and I was there. I was part of the Lake Worth staff advisory team that reviewed the proposals from the three main finalists in the Lake Worth procurement. And I'll just tell you, Lake Worth was in the right place at the right time. We, Lake Worth, were working toward getting the best proposals we could at what was pretty much the bottom of the capacity price market. So,
okay.
The same way that Vero was, from sitting here in 2014, we were in the wrong place at the wrong time in April of 2008. Although that contract, our existing contract in April of 2008, was a really good contract because the price of gas was moving through $9 a million, heading toward $14. So it just is what it is. We're not quite as low as Lake Worth to cut to the bottom line.
Okay, because Lake Worth has always held up has been why we should go back to OUC because Lake Worth got such a good deal. Have there been any changes to the exit penalty that we have under the? Is that going to survive into the amended PPA?
We have not even talked about that. I think so tentatively, I think the answer is no. We have not discussed that.
Okay. And the $85 million, is that a take or pay? The 85
megawatts, yes, that's take or pay.
Okay. And we currently are taking
93.
93?
To increase to 95 in January.
Although I think the usage has been lower, as we've discussed at prior meetings.
All right, and what's our current take on under the contract now?
Demand? Is that what you're asking?
Are you asking what? I don't
do we
know.
have
I think our total energy consumption is off a little bit from last year, but I don't know what like the monthly billing demand, what the monthly metered demand number is.
Do we have a take or pay provision under the current OUC contract?
No,
Other than the capacity charges.
The capacity amount, the megawatts, is reset from year to year. That's kind of an interactive process. OUC makes a projection. They send it to us. They say, we think your building demand, we think your real demand next year. They start with the total peak demand, subtract off our Big Blue capacity, subtract off our FMPA 3 projects capacity. They add 15% onto the original amount, and that comes up with a resultant number. And they say, we think your number for 2015 is going to be 100. And we say, you know, guys, we're looking at our sales, and we just don't see that. Our sales are a little softer than your forecast indicates. And as best I understand it, I haven't been a party to these, but as best I understand it, there's a negotiation. And in this context, we eventually agreed that for 2015, the number is going to be 95 megawatts.
They came
Once you get there, that 95 megawatts is a take-or-pay number for 2015. You pay 95 megawatts worth of capacity charges every month. Then you pay the energy charges based on what you use. Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
then we're dropping.
Now, if sales, if load went further south, there would be a corresponding subsequent year reduction, following year reduction in the megawatts on which we were paying the capacity charges, and there is presently no minimum in that.
Okay. If OUC takes the St. Lucie project from us, I have 2 questions about that. What happens to our capacity there? That's already subtracted, as you just described. It's subtracted out of the capacity requirements that we have. So that would be added back in?
That would be added back in to one or the other of the products.
Okay.
That'll be negotiated in detail. And whatever happens, there will be a definitive, exhaustive agreement come back to y'all and to council before anything definitive happens.
If they exercise this option, do you envision, since you haven't negotiated in detail, I'm not asking for a definitive answer, but there's significant potential liabilities to having some sort of ownership interest in a nuclear plant.
Yes, sir.
Would that all shift permanently? Or would they be able to come back and say, well, we're still going to take the electricity, but you got to fix it?
We have discussed that. We're not to the point of having a definitive resolution. The concept that we discussed is this. Let's say the plant runs for 60 years. It went online in I think it went online in late 83, and it's scheduled to presently, under the license extension that FPL has obtained from the NRC, scheduled to retire in 2043. Let's just say if they were to exercise the option in 2023, we would have had it for 40 years, they would have it for 20 years. The concept that we have is if everything is fine, and the decommissioning costs are what FPL projects them to be. And by the way, the PSC has approved FPL's most recent long-term nuclear decommissioning study, but we're talking about costs that are going to be incurred in 2095. Really.
Right. Yeah.
But the concept is that if the decommissioning fund is sufficient, we will have paid such and such into the decommissioning fund. They will, over the remainder of whatever period of time they take the St. Lucie power, pay thus and such into the decommissioning fund. If the decommissioning fund is sufficient, we're done. If there are cost overruns in decommissioning, the concept that we discussed is that we would share them proportionally. If they have it for 20 years out of the 60-year life and we have it for 40, we would take 2/3 of the overruns, they would take 1/3 of the overruns. That was it was a conversation that we had, again, to be negotiated in definitive detail.
Okay. Now, just in general, looking at this, I'm concerned because we've gotten into a lot of inappropriate contracts. We've either been short thinking or thought too long, or I'm not sure which way to do it. So I really don't want to make those mistakes again. Just reading your memo, all I'm seeing is that we get the $7 million reduction, some other things, but we're giving up a lot for that. So I'm not seeing the sense of the negotiation. Did they start asking for more, and we worked them down to this? I mean, what was the first offer? I mean, was there a back and forth, or was this?
There was definitely a back and forth, and the pricing on this table is lower than what they originally asked for. I'd really rather not go beyond that.
Okay. And I think that and I don't know, Tom, if you want to speak to this at all, but the one big assumption here that's not quantified at all is the cost of the transmission upgrades. There have been a lot of different numbers that I've heard through this whole process. Florida Power and Light had a number that they factored into the cost, what they said was part of their ultimate cost. They've also, Florida Power and Light told me there was other costs on the backside of their system that they were going to have to do the upgrade that wasn't expressed in that. But if we didn't do this, we would have to pay for that. And so I'm not, when are we going to have some quantification of that? Will that be with the optimization study that we're doing, or?
I could conceivably answer this, but Tom's really the guy. So
Okay.
I'm gonna step aside.
And I'll try to be concise about this. We will know with precision exactly what has to be done when we apply for transmission service officially with FPL, after we have our contract in hand with OUC, and they will tell us specifically what needs to be done, how much we have to pay for on our system. My understanding of the cost sharing, because we're a network customer, is they in general will pay for improvements that are needed on their system. We don't pay for them, they do. And we will pay for improvements that are needed on our system. And my sense is pretty clearly, without trying to be a forecaster, is that any cost out of our pocket will be substantially less than the first year's savings on this. $7 million you're talking about.
Will be what? I'm sorry.
Significantly less than the $7 million you're talking about for 1 year. I don't think your exposure is that high myself. We'll see. And if it all turns out that it doesn't work, you don't have to do it. If the transmission is not acceptable, you can just the contract with OUC will be contingent on acceptable transmission service.
Okay, that was my next question, and if Mr. Wright, you could confirm that, because the way you just described it, we have to have the contract before we get the price.
That's correct.
Something, yeah.
The contract will be contingent?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Any other questions?
Yeah, we talk about our peaking, and we talk about our 85 kilowatts.
Mm-hmm.
If we got everybody in the city to turn their pool pump on at night, we would drop our peak immensely. We'd also drop our amount that we do during the day. What would that do to this whole cost system?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know how many pool pumps you've got, and what are you going to assume? You're going to assume 1 horsepower at 700 watts. and then you have to factor back to a coincidence factor. That is how many pool pumps are actually on.
There
at
are
the
probably
time of the
about
peak.
10,000 pool pumps.
Okay,
So you got
7,000
700,000 watts.
7,000 kW. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, now of those at the time of a billing peak, there's going to be some coincidence factor. You're not going to have all 7,000 on at the same
Well,
time.
the thing is, the building peak,
But the answer's
looking
no.
at it, it's always been in the afternoon.
Mhm.
It's usually from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And most people have their pumps running then. If you cut them off, what would this do to the whole cost system?
Yay.
I do have a comment. First of all, your question is a very good one. That's one of the issues we've asked our rate consultant to look at, is the possibility of looking at time of use rates, which will give people, including residential and commercial customers, an incentive if they would like to. I would think of it as an optional rate, that if they want to defer some of their load to evenings and weekends, that would be a benefit to them and would overall will show up in a reduction over time in our forecasted peak. The other thing I want to remind you of is that we are a winter peaking utility. Even though we see high loads every day in the summertime, those occasional cold winter days we get, and they don't even come every year. We haven't had one of these really cold spells for 5 years probably. We have a substantially higher peak in the winter, and that's where our peak demand is set and forecasted. So, and those peaks always come first thing in the morning, 6, 7, 8 a.m.
Well, then there's the other thing. My electric hot water heater, I've got a timer. I can time when it goes on and when it goes off. And right now I time it from 8 to 10 in the morning. That's the only time my electricity is on for my hot water heater. I could do it anytime. And if you had a time of day or rate, it would affect when I did that. And a hot water heater is a big source or sink of electricity, too.
That you're absolutely correct. Timing of water heaters and control of water heaters is something that FPL does on a routine basis.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have
we could
smart
have that.
hot water heaters and smart
Well, they don't have to be that
refrigerators
smart.
that they can turn off.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. Well, but they don't do it with a smart meter. They just do it. They have a radio control system.
That's
We
what I
have
mean.
a
Radio
timer.
control to the house
We
to
have
shut
a
them
timer.
off.
We can put them on a timer too, in the winter and summer. There are options we can look at. We just never have had the incentive to do that before and taking the time. It's complicated for a small utility. It's a change of culture and some new equipment and some different ways to bill and that sort of thing that you have to look at. So we're going to look at it. I think that's a good idea. Time.
Okay, the other question I had of you while you're there, and it's in here, and you answered it, but maybe you can answer for the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
It gives 11,500 as the heat rate for our peaking, and that seemed high to me. But why don't you explain why you think they put 11,500 since we can run around 10 with our unit 2 and 5, and less than that with a combined cycle unit?
That is a little higher heat rate than our, and that's the efficiency measure for our conversion of fuel to kilowatt hours. That's a little less efficient than our combined cycle that we have at the plant. The other half of that story is that we don't have to pay $4 million a year to keep that standing by to serve our load. And that's what's really killing us right now. It's the fixed cost on our existing plant. It's not the heat rates right now. The heat rates are only indirectly a contributor to our high costs, and that they're not very efficient. They're not called on very often.
I've got a couple things to
Sure.
add to that.
Absolutely.
First, I can tell you why it's 11,500. It's because their peakers are 90 to 92 vintage peakers, and those are the heat rates on their peakers. Additionally, from our perspective, in general, we should expect that we will be able to buy economy power from the Florida Municipal Power Pool instead of paying that 11,500 times the indexed price of gas, assuming that pool power is available and that as available transmission capacity is available. Generally speaking, those things should happen in the vast majority of hours.
I have
Yes,
a
sir.
question.
Yeah.
A couple, actually. Your assessment of the probability of removing all of the contingent questions that you've raised and which exist regarding the interpretation of the agreement and the furtherance of negotiations with OUC, And in addition to the probability of removing them, could you at this point give us any idea of the time frame for the completion of the negotiations related to cleaning up all of those questions?
The big unknown, and the answer is I'll give you my best.
Okay.
The big unknown is what's going to be required on the transmission side. The other unknown is what FPL's response will be. Frankly, I'm optimistic that FPL is going to say, we're not standing in the way of Vero Beach's customers getting lower rates. Go forth and do good. That's my go-in expectation of the response from Florida Power and Light. So that really is going to leave transmission, like I said earlier, and Tom can come back up and talk about it. But I think the sense is I think that we're moderately optimistic, cautiously optimistic might be a better term, that the transmission arrangements can be put in place fairly quickly. How quickly that is, I don't know. January, March, April, I don't know. Realistically, if I were to really say what I really think, I think we can get the definitive agreement drafted by sometime in December, such that it can be, we'll know FPL's response to the overall issue by then. Certainly, I think get the agreement negotiated by December, written that is, and negotiated and written by December, and get it in front of council and in front of the OUC board in January. If the transmission falls into place, then we can get the pricing going soon. I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, maybe February or March. But again, if the transmission gets sideways, and it's a highly regulated area, if the transmission gets sideways, I can't tell you when it would be.
Has OUC asked for any extension? If in fact they negotiate the rest of the terms that you've sought in terms of lengthening the contractual relationship between the two parties?
No, sir. The agreement would terminate at the same time the existing agreement would terminate.
And finally, for me, I walked out of the house early this morning, saw a headline in the paper, and I've been trying, and I haven't had a chance to review your document in its entirety yet. In simplistic terms, assuming that FPL rates are, 28, 30% lower than city rates, and if this were executed and there was a reference to savings to the customer who uses 1,000 kilowatts, what would that differential shrink by?
With emphasis on the word if and when, and yes, words if and
sure,
when.
Of course.
Yeah. If you add $7 million and $150,000 a year in savings from reduced compliance with NERC requirements, and then take 6% off that total to reflect a lower, just the natural 6% reduction that's no longer be transferred to the general fund because we go on the basis of 6% of total cost, total revenues. That gets you up to the vicinity of $7.5, $7.6 million total reductions. That translates, again, emphasis on the words if and when all this stuff kicks in.
Right.
That translates to something on the order of $10 a 1,000 kilowatt hours reduction in the overall average cost. If you apply that reduction of $10 to the current rate, which is $123.93, excluding franchise fees and taxes, that takes you down to $113.93. That's right on top of 40% of the way from where we are today to FPLs. It's $10 against a $25 or $24.74 difference between us and FPL today on an apples-to-apples basis on the rates.
And I guess I can figure out the percentage. Okay, that's a good starting point. Thank you.
I'd like to make a statement and then have you comment. It seems to me that although this isn't part of what we're dealing with, that this is also going to take a shot at a small bite in simplifying the possibilities of a sale. Because with the plan out of the way and some of these other things cleared, and especially with some agreements on what to do with St. Lucie Power, we've got just a few less things, not the big elephant, but a few less things to contend with if in the future we decide to go, back to the sale or continue to negotiate the sale. Is that true, or is that wishful thinking?
I think that everything you said is true. It would take Big Blue out of the picture. We would still remain a liable party under the St. Lucie 2 PPA with a FMPA, and as you referred to it, the big elephant is going to be the remaining terms of the Stanton PPA and project support contract and the Stanton 2 PPA and project support contract. Now, if thinking further into the future, if we get to 2029, the new amended PPA ending at the same time as the existing one with OUC would have expired. If things might change, it would make it easier, but you're still left with the big elephant of the city being able to, one way or another, resolve our contract liabilities to FMPA and to the other project participants in the agreements in which we participate, Stanton 2, and St. Lucie. So, it's everything you said is true, but it might be wishful thinking to try to translate that into the idea that you're really going to be able to pull off a sale. But if market conditions change, or if Stanton and Stanton 2 get retired, let's say in 2039 or something like that, then maybe at that point you could do something.
I just kind of meant to say that this is not going to actually do anything to close the sale. We still got a hell of a long way to go if we go that way. But for the people that are still very interested in that, this will be at least a tiny step in the right direction, not taking us in the wrong direction. And the business of change on rate structures and things like that, and the cost of electricity and where it comes from. I've been in the business for 50 years. And it will change again. The whole picture of who pays and how much over the next 10 years will again take a full cycle. Who knows how?
When we're talking about the power plant, we're talking about mothballing it, not taking it down, correct?
Mr. Richards and I have discussed this. We're talking about retiring it, but not necessarily demolishing it.
Right, mothballing, what I call mothballing, retiring. Okay.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
To that. On page 2 of your memo, you talk about the retiring the power plant, and it will reduce the cost accordingly. What would be the under this circumstance, what would be the timing of that, and what kind of cost reduction are you talking about? And would that interpret directly into the reduction in the cost of a kilowatt hour to the customer?
Answer the last question first. Yes, it would, whenever we're able to fully ramp down operations at the power plant. That would directly translate into reduced costs that go into calculating our rates. In terms of timing, we don't know for sure. It's going to be some number of months from the time, remember the logical sequence is transmission in place, peaking capacity kicks in. At that point, we can really start to wrap it up at Big Blue. We don't know exactly what the trajectory is, but we're assuming some number of hundreds of thousands of dollars, $500,000 or $600,000 over the first year of continuing costs as they ramp down to zero. The a ballpark estimate that Mr. Richards and I have discussed that he thinks is reasonable, that, sounds reasonable to me. And Ms. Bloomstein, I've only been doing energy for 34 years in Florida, but I've been around this stuff for a long time. Tom and I agree this is a reasonable number. We think long-term, just a monitor, keep security, whatever it is probably going to be on the order of $50,000 or $100,000 a year. So you're looking at saving probably $4 million a year just in O&M costs, the fixed O&M costs of having the employees there to run the plant if and when it needs to be run, plus whatever the savings are in avoided capital costs that you would not otherwise have to spend to keep the plant running. So
in terms of the reduction, if I compare it to the reduction that you list up above, so $10 per 1,000 kilowatt hour, if you got all the cost savings that you're speculating, it would be somewhere between $6 or $7 per 1,000 kilowatt hours. No, because it's going to be the cost that we will save will be replaced by the peaking capacity payments that we will be paying to OUC. For planning purposes and for presentation purposes, as of today, we're assuming that it's going to be an approximate wash. My best estimate is it'll probably be better than a wash, but we don't have good, solid budget numbers for what the avoided capital costs will be. I think our rates will be lower than they would otherwise be with the peaking product, and as Jim pointed out, we're also avoiding whatever risks are attendant to keeping a power plant operating. But you can't just say that $4 million a year savings translates to additional rate reductions because it's replaced by the peaking capacity payments.
I have a couple of questions. And this may have been covered before and somehow I missed it, but the capacity charge and the operating charge that OUC charges, those are additive. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So that the final cost per kilowatt is something.
Yeah, currently it's about $73 a megawatt hour.
Okay.
Currently.
And what fraction is the carrying cost, and what fraction is the operating cost? Do we have any idea approximately?
Today, roughly $30 or so out of the $70 or so is capacity, and $42 is energy. The $42 per megawatt hour of energy is going to stay the same. The capacity cost reduction is going to take us down overall to something in the vicinity of $60 a megawatt hour.
Okay, thank you. Second question. I've been hearing the term mothballing versus retirement. I want to make sure that we're talking the same language. To me, mothballing means at some point you can bring it back online, and for whatever purpose, whether it's technically feasible or financially feasible, I don't know. Whereas retiring means it comes down, you use whatever you can whenever you can, but ultimately it's going to end up being essentially scrap.
I'm happy to take a shot at answering that, and Tom's going to come up here and yank me if I say something wrong, but we have discussed this. We are discussing it in terms of retirement. Once you shut these power plants down, you're not going to bring the power plants themselves back. You can keep the building, you can keep the site, you may be able to use the site for new generation at some point in the future, but in terms of the actual boilers and generators, they're going to be taken out of service permanently. Did I get that right? Okay.
Okay. My final point is regarding the I guess what you call the retirement cost, or when the Stanton plant goes finally down.
St. Lucie is the one I was really talking about. There will be decommissioning costs with the coal plants, Stanton and Stanton 2, but they're a lot less than the decommissioning cost of a nuclear plant. But go ahead.
And you say that you've agreed in principle that if we use the power there for 40 years and FPL uses it for 20 years, the decommissioning costs would be apportioned along those lines.
What I tried to say was, we have paid decommissioning costs through the rates that we've paid for the St. Lucie Power for 31 years now. Mm-hmm. We will continue. Actually, I don't even know. I know there's not anything in the retail rate right now for decommissioning. There may be something in the wholesale rate. I'm not sure. But regardless, we've paid what we've paid, and to the extent we keep paying under the existing St. Lucie project contracts, we'll keep paying. If OUC takes over, their rates, as they pay the actual costs of the St. Lucie project, as charged by FPL to the project participants, they'll pay whatever decommissioning costs they pay for whatever period of time. I'm using the hypothetical, if they take the last 20 years of the project's life and we've had the first 40, if there are any decommissioning cost overruns, let's say we get to 2095, when after storing it to cool down for 50 years, FPL actually starts spending money to really decommission, take everything down, put it in casks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If the decommissioning reserve is sufficient to finance the decommissioning activities at that time, then we're done and everybody's happy. If there are overruns, the concept that we discussed with OUC is that they would take a proportion based on the number of years they had the output, we would take the other proportion. If we have it for 40 years and they have it for 20, we'd take 2/3 of the overruns, they'd take 1/3 of the overruns, if any.
No, okay, I understand that. Now, my question is, based on the length of operation, it seems to me you're more likely to have made modifications to the plant which could result in overruns in the last 20 years rather than the first 20 years which the plant was, was operating presumably under normal conditions. And over the last 20 years, you might have to do some greater expenditures to keep it going so that the actual decommissioning, the overrun is back-end loaded, so to speak, by the last 20 years rather than by the first 40. Does that make sense?
Conceptually, it makes sense. It's conceivable. I'll say that a couple of things. One, FPL recently completed the major upgrade to St. Lucie 2 that will be in effect for the rest of its life. They did a major steam generator replacement and upgrade. To the extent that, and additionally, they do a major decommissioning cost and engineering analysis at least every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that there's a determination that it's an actuarial calculation, to the extent they determine that the fund needs additional contributions in the interim, they would raise the rates accordingly. Mm-hmm. To the extent that, let's say they do another study in 2017. I think they did the last one in 12. It might have been 11. Let's say they do a new one in 2017. They say, we're actuarially short. We're going to raise the rates. Those new rates, including the higher projected decommissioning costs, would be rolled into the rates as of the next rate-setting date. Let's say January 1st, 18. If OUC were to have taken over the St. Lucie power purchase through a PPA with us, they would then be paying the higher rates for the remainder of the term. So I don't. It's a reasonable thought. I don't think it's a huge concern in the way I look at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rudd, I have a couple more questions. I think Bob brought it up, got me thinking this way. With respect to the St. Lucie and the gas contracts, and Jim, as I recall, the valuation, the gas contracts when we had it valued by PA Consulting was worth about $10 million. and the St. Lucie was about a break even, plus or minus, not, but the material contracts that were underwater were the Stanton 1 and Stanton 2. And we then negotiated with OUC for OUC to step into our purchase power contracts. We had to pay them $34 million. I'm just trying to remember these numbers, $34 million plus the gas contract, and they took the St. Lucie, which the sense was they wanted St. Lucie then, and I think it's clear now that they kind of want St. Lucie. And they would take our share of the Stantons. Now, the problem that we came with that, notwithstanding our inability to negotiate our cost with FNPA, but OUC's problem was there's our bonds and OUC's bonds in the Stantons. Mm-hmm. And FNPA wanted our piece to be above OUC's piece, and OUC always imagined that it would be subordinate to their original bond covenants. Is that fairly accurate?
I think that's conceptually accurate.
Okay.
There were conflicts between OUC's bond covenants and FNPA's bond covenants, and OUC said we can't live with the FNPA bond covenants as a contract participant stepping into Vero's shoes, and FNPA said we can't change those because our bondholders, the bond trustees, all depend on them. So that's basically right, Scott.
That problem would be, I think, unique to OUC because OUC is the owner of the Stanton 1 and 2. Any of the other municipal utilities here could step into our position, perhaps acquire a bigger piece of the Stanton 1 and 2 and St. Lucie, and there would be no issues about the bond covenants. This issue would not be there for if Bartow or any of the other non-generating plants. Is that the specific issue that the OUC pulled out for is related to the fact that OUC's own bond covenants for the same plants. Do you understand my question?
I understand your question, and I can't give you a definite answer. What you say makes sense, but when you get into negotiations like this with lenders' lawyers, it gets really complicated.
Well,
and what I can't say is that that the difficulty that OUC would have had taking on the PPAs, taking on our position under the PPAs, was solely because of their debt on Stanton and the FNPA debt on Stanton. The sense I have is that there were other issues related to OUC's overall debt, which is not just Stanton, it's their other power plants and other debt on their system. But I don't have a definitive answer. I can't tell you that I haven't reviewed their bond resolution, so I can't tell you that I know that specifically.
I'm not asking for that.
Yeah.
That we give an answer.
Conceptually, if it were another utility that were in a position where they didn't have that kind of problem, then conceptually that should work out. The problem is we don't see one out there.
If they already had a position in Stanton, they would just be increasing their position in Stanton with the FNPA. Mm-hmm. Okay. It looks like we're giving up the cherry in our 4 contracts and the one that's got some value. OUC obviously sees some value in it, at least in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think this would make it actually the opposite conclusion, Bob, that you came to, is it would make it much harder to find some municipality to take our position because our better positions are now gone. And the other question that I have is if in 2029, 2030, OUC decides to retire Stanton 1 and 2, and we say, great, now we can get out, wouldn't we still have to be operating a utility because we're only passing through the cost from Stanton, from the St. Lucie? It's only a pass-through. We couldn't how would we get out of it without, again, coming up under the IRS covenants, the private activity use things? Would we be stuck owning a utility under this option agreement until Florida Power and Light decides to decommission the St. Lucie plant?
I don't think you wouldn't have a problem with the IRS private use rules because OUC would be taking the power.
Well, there was a problem with the IRS private use rules before when OUC was taking the power.
My understanding.
We still have FMPAs in this.
FMPA is not the problem. The problem with the private use, the problem with the private use rules was the role that FPL would play in there. And I was not present for that. That all happened before I got here, or at least before I was engaged by the city on this matter. My understanding is that when push came to shove, nobody was willing to ask for a private letter ruling from the IRS on this because they were afraid they didn't want to know what the answer would be. That's my best understanding of the situation. Now, to try to move on, though, to answer your question, if you assume that Stanton 1 and Stanton 2 are actually retired, then we're done with those projects. We're done. The contracts are over. If there's any ultimate decommissioning deficiency, the project participants have to pony up their shares of whatever that is. If there's a surplus in the decommissioning reserve, that'll get distributed back to the project participants on a prorated basis. That's all fine. But once we're done with those two projects, we're done with those two projects. The question of whether we have to continue to operate a utility or choose to continue to operate a utility is one thing. We would still be liable as a project participant under the FMPA PPA and the FMPA project support contract for St. Lucie 2 for the long run, which is to say we could wind up with the same bond covenant conflicts with OUC in terms of actually completely getting out of it. The ultimate real issue, though, in that if OUC is going to buy the power till the end of the PPA, there will not be a private use problem. We would continue to be obligated under the terms of our hypothetical new agreement with OUC for whatever our share of the decommissioning costs would be, and they'd be liable for whatever their share of the additional decommissioning costs above what everybody's already paid into the decommissioning reserve, along with FPL's customers, et cetera. I am thinking that the remaining issue, the key remaining issue in that scenario would likely be the long-term contingent liability obligation of Vero Beach as a project participant to all of the other project participants.
Particularly if we had no ratepayers. Again, there's no ratepayers for us to collect this liability from.
If there were, okay. If there were no ratepayers, I was thinking on a different trajectory, but let me address that. We will still be a party under the FMPA contracts, the PPA and the project support contract for the St. Lucie project. As such, we would be contractually prohibited from disposing, selling, abandoning, etc., all or substantially all of our utility system by that contract. Hypothetically, we could go to FMPA and say, we want to get out of the utility business. Can we work something out? They would probably say, well, we will be happy to work with you on this. There is a long-term contingent liability here that you would have to deal with. And one way of dealing with that, which is an idea I had back at the end of April of this year, is if we really want to get out of the utility business, is we could find a way to backstop with the characterization I suggested at the time, which I will tell you was acceptable to FMPA's legal team, was that the affected beneficiary parties, the city of Vero Beach, Indian River County, and the town of Indian River Shores, could agree to backstop the ultimate long-term contingent liability for these hypothesized decommissioning cost overruns with a general obligation pledge. You wouldn't have to commit to issue bonds, but you would have to commit that you would backstop that liability with your taxing authority. And it seemed reasonable to me that if we're getting 40% of the benefits and Indian River Shores is getting 7% of the benefits and the county's getting the other 53% of the benefits, that everybody ought to agree to backstop that on a prorated basis. And that was the suggestion I made, and Fred said, that's pretty reasonable to me. We never got there because these conversations took place at the beginning of May, and thing came to a rather screeching halt on June 2nd with the exchange of correspondence between FMPA and OUC regarding the bond covenant conflicts. But there's a potential way through that in the scenario where Stanton 1 and Stanton 2 are retired.
Okay, and so go back to what you were thinking that I was asking before, because really what I'm trying to do is not tear this apart, but I'm trying to take it apart so that we don't get into so we don't sit down in 10 or 15 years and have the utility commission sitting there look back and say, what in the world was Stradley thinking, when they recommended this, or what was Mayor Winger thinking when we got into this, as we've tried to look back at what earlier councils have done and earlier commissions have done. So that's really where I'm trying to go with this. So you thought I was bringing up another thing that caused you to think. I could see your wheels turning. And
I think I answered it in what I said previously.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Mark?
Don't go far.
Mark, stay right here,
Mark Mucher again. I had three hopefully quick things I wanted to say, but you just brought up a fourth. Let me start with the first. When I first got this document yesterday afternoon, my first reaction was the same as one Scott brought up, and that was, do we really need to be getting into more long-term contracts? Now, this doesn't extend the term of our contract, but we just haven't had very good luck with long-term contracts, so I just hope we're doing the right thing here. It looks good at first blush, and I just hope and pray that it's the right thing. The second thing is, a very good friend of mine this morning asked me, he said, Mark, why haven't we tried to renegotiate this before? Why did we wait till, these last few weeks to do this? And I'll ask you to answer that later if you would. Third, I'm a little curious as to how we're going to book this $10 million or this $1 million gas contract, and how that's going to enter into the rates, if at all, or we're just going to put it off to the side. And then are turning that over to OUC on a permanent basis, which is my understanding. But the last thing was, on this OUC option for the St. Lucie nuclear, in Chef's part of this letter, he says that OUC has an option to take over our entitlement through a PPA, but in the OUC, page 2 of the OUC talking points, they talk about an option to take over both the rights and the obligations, which I see as a fine point, a little different. It sounds like it would get us out of the that part of our FMPA contract altogether. Just move it over to them. But those are the four things. Thank you.
Did he state them adequately to you, Mr. Wright, as a question? Or?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. Regarding your concern, as reiterated by Mark, yeah, this is a long-term contract, but I think the correct frame of reference is you're already in a long-term contract, and that is what we call the WWHHA scenario. What would have happened anyway, and what will happen anyway, is performing the existing contract. We would think. So the comparison is this new, assumed, hoped for, whatever, potential amended PPA versus versus performing the existing PPA, and that's a decision you all can advise on, and a decision the council can make. They can say, no, we don't want to do this. We'll stick with the PPA we've got and pay the prices that are embedded therein. That's a decision council can make. My instructions were do what you can to lower rates, and here I am. To answer his second question, which follows directly from that, the reason we didn't do this before is we were working on trying to sell the system until, as I said, things came to a rather abrupt halt on that front at the beginning of June, when we wound up with OUC not being able to take our position, step into our shoes under the FMPA project contracts because of bond covenant conflicts. That was really the end of that. And as I said to council, the deal that exists in black and white in the transaction documents, our asset purchase and sale agreement with FPL, and the rest of the assignments and takeover contracts that are part of the FPL Vero Beach transaction documents, cannot be performed as they stand because we have a specific failure of a condition precedent to the closing of the transaction, and that is OUC has to step into our shoes in the contracts before we can close. That's not going to happen. So if we were to get a sale done in any event, it would require some other set of contracts other than those that exist. The answer to the question, why didn't we do this sooner, is very simple. Until the beginning of June, we were working on selling the system. Within a few days after June 2nd, we figured out this is a problem and we need to get on the stick to lower our rates any way we can. We and OUC were concerned that FPL could view negotiations such as those we have now undertaken, as being a breach of our contract obligations to FPL under the asset purchase and sale agreement, or that they might view it as some kind of tortious interference with contract by OUC in negotiating with us for something new. So we said, we're not going to talk about this until we have a waiver letter in place. For whatever reasons, it took 5 weeks to get that letter in place. We signed that letter. The last party to sign, I think, was FPL. It doesn't matter. We all signed within a few days of each other, but the last signature on that waiver letter was obtained on July the 14th. The town sued us on July 18th. The county, quote, sued us, unquote, at the PSC on July 21st. But by that time, we were underway, gearing up to schedule meetings with OUC. And here we are. That's the exact timetable of how this happened.
Are you?
Please go ahead. I was going to talk about his last 2 points, but go ahead.
Well, in the context of the discussion and the negotiations, have we ever considered seeking from OUC a reduction in the length of the contract under the terms that would be equitable to both parties and sort of captured in at least the framework that you've laid out here? Or have we simply, if the question's ever arisen, or are we simply accepting the fact that because the contract, the initial current contract has an expiration date of
2029,
that would be the starting date, that the finishing date for both parties to agree to in the discussions related to the refinements that you're talking about. In other words, it seems to me that the energy business is likely to continue to change. The rate reductions that may be achieved in this initiative could be fulfilled on a long-term basis, although I'm somewhat suspicious of that given the nature of competition and the supply of energy. But is that a point that they would dismiss automatically, or is that something that could be raised in future negotiations?
To answer those as best I can, it's not something that we discussed. Hypothetically, we could address it. If I were they, I would say, we have offered you substantial discounts from the existing PPA for the remainder of the term. We've offered you $7 million a year for the first 3 years and between $4 and $5 million a year for the last 12 years. The way I see it, and for good or ill, I did used to be an economist.
You'd expect that answer.
Certainly I would expect that answer, and if I were OUC, I would say, we're offering you big value on the front end. If you want to cut off the value to us on the back end, we're going to have to renegotiate the whole pricing trajectory. And I will tell you that this is maybe front of the envelope, but I deal with this stuff all the time, and the capacity payments out here are, they're not only they're less than. Going out in time, they're not only, a lot less than what we're paying under the existing PPA, but they're not out of line with what you would expect the long-term cost of market capacity to be if you were to, say, build a brand new combined cycle plant in the year 2022 at a cost of $1,300 or $1,400 a kilowatt, and translate that back to what an appropriate capacity charge would be attached to such a project, which is ultimately, when you're really out in the real market, the long-term marginal cost, which is the cost of adding new capacity, is going to be something like that. These are less than that. So,
I'll save my response for a later date. But no. Thank you for the explanation. It's a rational explanation.
Thank you. Let's see. I was going to say, I don't know the accounting answer to the question of booking the gas contract, but what I can say is, and I did discuss this with Tom some weeks ago, the risk to the city of giving up the gas contract is it's a good gas contract because of its vintage. It's got a lower transportation. It's got a lower charge. If we ultimately decide, if we, the city, it doesn't seem real likely standing here today, but if we, the city, were to decide to put a new gas-fired power generator at the power plant site, we would have to go get new gas capacity, under FGT Phase 8 or whatever it would be. And the opportunity cost to us would be the differential between whatever the then current firm transportation service cost would be and what we would have given up from this.
Which was quantified a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, at $10 million.
I've heard the number of $10 million, but I don't know what the analysis was that came to that number.
Ultimately, that's the economic value. You've described the economic value in having an old contract, and that's the economic value that PA Consulting put at it.
Okay. All right.
And I think that I saw just this actually wouldn't be booked at all because it's not an asset on our books now, and so it just would. We just wouldn't have the contract anymore, so it would not affect our financial statements. I have two other questions, maybe two and a half, maybe three. If I think about it, but
maybe 4 or 5.
could be. But I want you to know that I'm prided myself on always ending this meeting by noon, so I'm under my own time pressure here. Did we look at the option of just terminating this contract and renegotiating a short-term contract for power? As Mayor Winger often has said, and I agree with him, when you go long-term in commodities, you usually end up getting whooped. And I don't think whooped is the word that he used, but I think it
That's a good Southern word. I like it.
It probably captures the meaning. There's a cost to terminating this contract. And did we look at that at all? Did we weigh that?
Here's what I can tell you. I thought about it. I think I discussed it with Mr. O'Connor, but the idea of amortizing $50 million over 15 years or whatever other period you'd amortize it, to the tune of an extra $3 or $4 or $5 million, again, depending on the amortization period, just made it seem like an impracticable concept when we thought about it.
Okay.
We didn't run spreadsheets. We didn't put pencil to paper on it. It just, because of the potential magnitude of the cap on liquidated damages at $50 million, we just didn't think it was a practicable idea.
Okay, and those damage contracts you earlier believed are going to survive into the new amended contract.
I think it's actual damages subject to the caps that are set forth therein.
Okay.
And it is
$20 million.
bilateral. If they walk, they have to give us $50 million or actual damages.
Yeah,
too.
why would they walk?
Right. We observe things change, and if the market value is greater than $10 a kilowatt month, you never know.
Well, in that case, they have the option to renegotiate it. They have the option to terminate.
Right.
And the only reason they would ever exercise that option is because things have gone the other way, and now they want more money from us. We don't have the option. We don't have a like option if the cost of power goes down. 2008, nobody thought it was going to. I can acknowledge that. It did. We're giving them now, for this short term, for this benefit today, the option to raise it in the future where we don't have the same right to renegotiate the contract in good faith at a lower price. And I'm not real comfortable with that part of it. That seems to be a disproportionate in terms of going forward. I'm also have some concerns about, and I'm going to phrase this as a question. If we were to start over again with this trying to find a buyer, are we in a stronger position not having the gas contract and having OUC having the option for the St. Lucie? Or are we in a weaker position? And I also find it interesting that the St. Lucie option survives the renegotiating. So if they come back and decide to raise the rates and we don't agree to it and we go someplace else, they still keep that option for the St. Lucie. But go back to my question. If we were to hire you to renegotiate a sale and to find a buyer, are we in a stronger position without those or a weaker position?
I think the answer is you're in a weaker position, that those are assets that have some value.
Okay.
Yeah. But against that, you have to weigh the other aspects of the existing deal that you'd have to address, the LDs and frankly just the prospect of trying to find a buyer.
I understand, and I'm not saying that we should. We're in a position now where we need to be lowering our rates. I understand that, but I am concerned that the net effect of this will keep us locked into the utility business, and I'm concerned about these options, or the option to raise the rates, and we don't have an option to renegotiate if the market continues to become cheaper, power becomes cheaper. Any other comments? Okay. Then, Mr. Wright, I appreciate your time, and I may see you again this evening. And any other business today?
Should we be endorsing this or not endorsing it or anything like that, or just accepting the explanation?
As far as I was concerned, this was Q&A. You all can do whatever you want to do, but my thought would be wait till you see the definitive agreement. And,
Yeah,
and
I agree.
pass
I
on that.
appreciate that. And I also think we need to see the final product, but also the rate study that's coming up, too.
Right.
I think that's going to be a factor into some of our decisions. Okay, and our next meeting would be the second Tuesday of November, okay, at 10 o'clock in the morning. And with no other business,
Move for adjournment.
okay, second, all in favor? Aye, we're adjourned.